Welcome to another piano lesson with Warren. My name is Warren McPherson. If you're new to the channel, just joining me, welcome. I'm glad you're here today. This is a channel where we share proven tips on gospel piano playing. Especially if you want to be able to play piano by ear, this is one of the best channels to learn everything you can about chords, scales, rhythms, ear training, theory, you name it, we have it here. Today is no different. I'm going to talk about 10 very important musical terminologies that every pianist should know. A lot of these terminologies are sometimes misinterpreted or misunderstood, and so I just sort of pick out 10 of these musical terminologies that I believe every pianist should know and understand the true meaning or the context of when and where these musical terminologies should be used. All right, so stay tuned. Remember to hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, so you can get weekly update on new content. Be right back. So there are so many terminologies in music, whole lots of them. And over the years, some of them have sort of lost their true meaning of how these terminologies should be used, or what do they actually mean when someone say this or someone say that. So while there are dozens and dozens of terminologies out there, I just sort of narrowed it down today to the top 10 that I believe are either often misused or quite a few people just don't even know what they really mean. So I'm going to shed some light on that for you today. The first one is suspension versus sustain. Sustain versus suspension. A lot of people use these two interchangeably. They think they're the same thing. But they're very two different things when someone say to sustain or a suspension. So let's talk about that. Now, sustain just means to hold a particular note or pitch for an extended period of time. So for example, if I press this note, it's been sustained, 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 sustained. Still hearing it, and now it's gone. So when you press a key on the keyboard, it's sustained for a significant amount of seconds. That's how long the note is being held for. It's being sustained. Opposed to, it's gone. The note is no longer being sustained. And you know, the word sustain is used a lot more for instruments like woodwinds, brass instruments, string instrument that really has the ability to sustain a note for a significant period of time. You know, a wind instrument or a violin can sustain a note for up to a minute if possible. For wind players and brass players, it depending on, you know, how much breath they have. But for a string player, they can sustain a single note across multiple measures for well into a minute. Pianists don't really have that option. We have to repeat the note to get that significant length. But that's what really sustains mean. So when someone says you have to suspension that note, that's not the correct term. They need to say you need to sustain that note. So what is suspension now? Now suspension has to do with how certain notes are resolved within a chord. For example, if I play this triad, I can sustain the chord or suspend the chord by doing this. This is called a suspended chord, the C suspended fourth. And it's called suspended because the third note of the chord is being raised a half step, which creates this tension of suspension. Now, oftentimes, a suspended chord is resolved. You naturally hear that interval of a 4 moving to an interval of a third, and it gives a sense of completion. That is called a suspended chord. suspended fourth. And it's used a lot in contemporary Christian music. There's also the suspended two. That's when, again, you take the third degree of the scale and you lower it by a whole step. It gives you the suspended two. It's not a powerful pull as the suspended fourth. The suspended fourth has a more powerful sort of tension. So it gives a more powerful resolution. Not so much with the suspended two. And then you can get more intricate when we talk about the 9/8. You know, it's like the suspended two, but not really, because now we have the third and we have the 9 up here, and so we can have the 9 resolving to the octave or resolving up to the third. So this is just some more common terms where you'll hear suspensions being used. So just know that sustain refers to the duration of a pitch, how long a note is being held. The suspension has to do with how notes are moved and used within a chord to create tension and resolution. And that helps to create some form of movements within the chord. So I'm playing just a C chord, but I'm moving through different suspensions. Suspension 2 to resolution, suspension 4 to resolution. So that's the difference. Moving down the line to terminology number 2, note versus pitch. Another terminology that a lot of people use interchangeably, but they're not really the same thing. A note is when we're talking about a musical note, a single note. So I can say the C note, or I can say the A flat note, or the E flat note. When we say a note, we're referring to a particular pitch. Doesn't matter not particular pitch, a particular note on the keyboard. So I could say that's a C sharp note, but this is also a C sharp note. This is also C sharp note. I'm playing octave, but these are all different notes. Pitch, however, has to do with high and lows. So this is a C, but it's a sort of like medium low C. Now I'm now talking about the pitch, medium low. I can play the C down here, and this is a very deep low C, a deep pitch, or a high C, a high pitch, very high, huh? Or, so pitch has to do with the spectrum of the register, how high, how low. And note just have to do with a musical note on the keyboard. Could be anyone. A C note, a F sharp note, G flat note, an F note, a D note, you know, notes. Another word that they use for note is key. I'm going to talk about a little bit about that later. So that's sort of the difference between note and pitch. One is referring to the spectrum of how high and how low, and one is just referring to the individual note itself. Terminology number 3 is extended chords versus altered extended chords. A lot of people think that when you say extended chords or when you say altered extended chords, you're just talking about every chord that is beyond a triad. So here we call a triad. A triad is just a 3-note chord. A triad can be major, it could be minor, it could be diminished, it could be augmented. These are all different types of triads. Now we can get into sevenths. You have the major seventh, the dominant seventh, the minor seventh, the diminished seventh, half diminished, the full diminished sevenths. These are different types of sevenths. Now, once we sort of go beyond sevenths, we get into, more like 5-note chords and beyond. And this is what we call extended chords. This is a C13th chord. It's an extended chord, just an extended chord, right? Now, if I were to do something like this, now I get into altered extended chord. It's an extended chord, yeah, because it goes beyond a seventh, but it's also altered, meaning there are notes in the chord that has been changed. And in this case of this chord is called a sharp 9, sharp 5 chord. The 9th note of the chord has been raised, and the 5th note of the chord has been raised. Sharp 9, sharp 5. Another form of altered chord is the flat 9, flat 5. Some people call it the flat 9, sharp 11. Ambiguous, doesn't matter. If I introduce the G down here, then it becomes more of a sharp 11. If I remove the G, then you can think of it as a flat 5 because there is no 5th. Doesn't really matter, just semantics, flat 5, sharp 11. Important thing to know is that it's an altered chord, And so when it comes to extended chord, a chord can be extended, but it's not altered. In this case, I could have a major 13th or a dominant 13th or even a minor 13th. These are extended diatonic chords. Once you start to introduce notes outside of the key, then the chord becomes altered. And that's the difference between extended chords and altered extended chords. A chord can be extended but not altered. But a chord has to be extended before it can be altered. Make sense? Number 4 for terminology is register versus modulation versus transposition. A lot of these words people mix and mince and they think they're the same thing. So let's take them individually. What is register? Now, if you remember a moment ago when we talked about pitch, pitch has to do with loudness and softness. And pitch is often used sort of synonymously with register. Registers are basically the different segments of how the pitch spectrum is sort of separated. So we can have the medium register, which generally has to do with the center of the piano, about here. This is sort of like the central. We call this the medium register. Then we call, like right here, the low mids. It's a little dark, the low mids register. And then we have the low register. Right? Then we have the high mids. It's light, it's flurry, the high mids. And then we have the highs when we get into the twinkly stars. So these are the different sort of registral band on the keyboard. So when someone talk about a register, or, oftentimes the singer might say, this is not in my register. Because a singer, especially a versatile singer, can sing very high, but a lot of them can also sing very low. And oftentimes if the melody can't fit within the highs or the low, the singer would say, this is outside of my register. Let me take an example. Let's take Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So now I'm singing Amazing Grace in my low register, but I can jump it up and use my higher register. I haven't changed the key, I'm just using my higher register. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. So I'm using my higher register, and I could also use my low register. So that's what registers mean. Modulation now, very different from register. Modulation means we're changing the key. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear. So I just modulated a half step up. Modulated. Oftentimes when we talk about modulation in music is always going up. Don't recall ever having an experience or hearing an example of a modulation going down. Just, it's not one of those things you hear in music. So you can almost bet whenever there's a modulation, it's going up. A modulation can happen in half step, in whole step, or even in thirds, major thirds or minor thirds. It depends. I think it's safe to say 90% of the modulations you'll come across is either going to be a half step or a whole step. So that's modulation. Transposition sort of have some different meaning. When someone often say transposed, also, we're talking about changing key. It's an acceptable term to say, I'm going to transpose this song from the key of C to the key of C sharp, D flat. Now I'm in the key of D flat. I just transpose it to D flat. I think the most accurate term would be the term modulation, because when we talk about transposition, it could get a little bit more technical. For example, in classical music, we have this thing called motif. And that's where composers take melodic lines and they move them up and down to different registers. Whenever they move these melodic lines, it can be known as a transposition, even though it's within the same key. So for example, if I'm doing a 1-6-2-5 in the key of C, 6-2-5, I can do let me do that again. See that little melodic motif I'm playing in my right hand? Check it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can hear that there's a similarity in those melodic lines that I'm playing. Da, 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 da. I'm taking that melodic motif and I'm transposing it. Not changing the key, I'm transposing the motif as I go up in different registers. So that's a term that's used a lot, thrown around a lot in jazz and classical music as it relates to compositions and how they move these little motivic ideas throughout the pieces. It's also known as transposition. So sometime, another example also in popular music of transposition is like those old Kirk Franklin songs. They sometimes, in those vamp sections, they may have the alto, tenor, soprano, or no, tenor, alto, soprano, singing a line, and then on the next repeat, they may have the soprano jump up a note, the tenor jump up a note, the alto jump up a note, and they keep doing that. They keep inverting the voices. That's another form of transposition because the notes keeps going up. They're not changing key, but it sounds as if, you know, something and everything is moving up and it's intensifying because the voices are getting higher. They're getting, you know, louder. That's another form of transposition. So yeah, it's one of those terms where, again, transposition means changing key, but it also means changing register for motivic ideas and melodic lines. So that's the difference between register, modulation, and transposition. Okay, number 5, terminology. Now we're going to talk about tonality. Tonality. What is the meaning of tonality? Now in music, especially in Western music, when we talk about tonality, we're talking about the sort of the structural home sound for the piece or for the song. In Western music, tonality is either going to be major or minor. So I can play a song in a minor tonality. That's a minor tonality. Or I can play a song in a major tonality. Major tonality. 99.9% of the songs you're probably going to be playing is either going to be in a minor tonality or a major tonality. Now there are other forms of tonality. Modal tonality is another one. And so a song can be more modal. A popular example of this is the song Blue and Green by Miles Davis. That is a sort of ballad tune, but it's predominantly modal. It's a modal composition. And there are a lot more modal compositions out there, especially in more modern times, jazz, classical. A lot of modal pieces. So modality is a tonality. And when we're talking about modes, we're really talking about the modes derived either from the major scale or the modes derived from the minor scale. So we have the Dorian, the Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian. Those are modes. And so in modal composition, the ways the chords work are different than how they work in minor and major. You know, generally in a minor or major tonality, we have the 5 going to 1 or the 5 going to 6. You know, there's always this sort of key center called the 1 that we're coming back to. In modal composition, the tonality gets a little bit obscure in terms of there is really no key center because it doesn't sound like a key center to us. For example, if I'm playing something in the Dorian mode, it sounds sort of incomplete because there's no 4 going to 1 or 5 going to 1. So modality gets a little bit obscure. Another form of tonality is the atonality. Now atonality has to do with there is no key center. So it's not really modal. It gets wilder than that because with modal composition, there is some confinement that it doesn't really go outside of. With atonality now, it's fair game. Every note on the keyboard is fair game. All 12 pitches, every chord, everything, it's atonal. You know, it's the wild, wild west. And so guys like Schoenberg with their 12-tone compositions and, that whole sort of era in classical music is when atonalism got a lot more popular. People still creating atonal compositions today. Not one of my favorites. But those are sort of like the 4 main types of tonality. I believe there are other forms of tonality that has evolved now, especially when people start to mess with the tuning of instruments. It creates other forms of tonality, but I basically just stick to minor and major tonality. But those are sort of the 4 main types of tonality you want to be aware of. The major tonality, the minor tonality, the modal tonality, and the atonal tonality. All right? Terminology number 6 is the word key. When we say a key, this is another one of those words or terms that sort of had various meanings. When we talk about key, A lot of the times it can mean we're just referring to a particular note on the keyboard. The C sharp key, D sharp key, the B flat key, or the A key. So we can sometimes use key synonymous with the word note. The F note or the F key. Most people probably use the word key. I know I do. The F key or the B key or the D key. But also key means the tonality that you're playing in. The C major key or the C minor key. So we use it to tell, in which key am I playing in? Am I in the key of E flat or am I in the key of A flat? Is the song in the key of F or is the song in the key of G minor? Now, note that key does not mean tonality because I could be in the key of G. But G what? This is why we have to identify now the tonality. It could be G minor or G major. So the key just tells you the home root note or the root chord, but it doesn't tell you the tonality. So this is an important thing to note about the use of the word key. Number 7, inversions versus voicing. A lot of people get confused about these two. Which is which? Does inversion mean the exact same thing as voicing? Can I just use the word inversion every time instead of voicing? Well, they're kind of similar, but they're also different. Inversion, for example, let's take the C major chord. It is said that the C major chord has 2 inversions. We have the root position, then we have the first inversion and the second inversion. It is C chord still, but the position is different. We call that an inversion. In this case, the C, the E is at the bottom, first inversion, the third of the chord. Second inversion, the 5th note of the chord is at the bottom. Now, if I were to do this with the left hand, am I still playing a C second inversion chord? No. That's because inversion is based on the lowest note in the chord. Without the left hand, the G is the lowest note, so it is a second inversion. Once I introduce something in the left hand, G is no longer the lowest note. C is. So the chord is still C, root position, even though this right hand has this thing over here. This is where voicing comes in now. A chord can be in root position, but the voicing can be different because this is a C chord. This is also a C chord. This is also a C chord. But the voicing is different. Still a C chord in root position, but the voicing is different. You can hear it. In terms of the note that is sticking out at the top, it's different. It's the same thing when we take bigger chords now, like take this 13th chord right here. This is one voicing for the 13th chord. This is another voicing. That's another voicing. That's another voicing. They're all 13th chords, C 13th, but by just arranging the notes, I get different voicing. So that's what voicing means. It's all about how the notes are arranged in the more upper register. The bass note stays the same, but the notes above the bass notes can be in any order, and that's what we call voicing. So that's the difference between voicing and inversion. Let's jump into something now that has to do with more movement. The term rubato. A lot of people don't even know this word or know what it means. So rubato in music, it's an Italian word basically, and it just means to be flexible with the time and the rhythm. And we use a lot of rubato when playing ballad style piano. So, if I'm playing, So you see how I'm speeding up and slowing down. I'm just flowing, almost like a water just running over a rock. That sort of just flow. That's rubato. Very important sort of piece to make your music have more soul, And you can use rubato even when you're not playing ballad music. Can be used in every genre of music. Doesn't matter how driving that tempo is. Find those little pockets in the rhythm and the time to slow down and speed up. And that will make the music become this living, breathing entity that sounds good, touches the soul. Rubato helps that. Now, oftentimes when we use rubato, terminology number 9, we often use crescendos. Crescendos and rubato is like, that goes hand in hand. You don't usually find one without the other. So when I'm using my rubato, crescendo is getting louder. So by gradually getting louder, we're crescendoing, increasing in volume and speed. Rubato and crescendo. Now the flip side of crescendo is to decrescendo, which is gradually slowing down. So in my example, when I did I speed up, I get louder, but then I also get slower and I get softer. So that's how you use rubato with crescendo and decrescendo to create this sort of 3D, again, coming alive version of your music. So those are the 10 terminologies I wanted to bring to your attention today. Clear up some confusion, so hopefully now when you're talking with fellow musicians, you understand the lingos they're using, the phrases, and you can also communicate. So again, we have suspension versus sustain, note versus pitch, extended chords versus altered extended chords, register versus modulation versus transposition, the difference between the three, tonality. We have major tonality, minor tonality, modal tonality, atonal tonality. Those are the four most popular types of tonality you'll find across all genres of music. Then key. The word key sort of have different types of meaning. It could refer to a single note, or it could refer to the home for the piece you're playing, the key for the piece you're playing. Inversions versus voicing. Just remember that the bass note is what anchors the inversion. If the bass note is holding down the root of the chord, then it's a root position chord. The voicing dictates how the upper register of the notes are arranged. They can arrange in all different types of order. That dictates the voicing. Rubato has to do with the flexibility in time and rhythm, how you utilize time and rhythm. And then the brother and sister for crescendo, for rubato, is crescendo and decrescendo. We often use these three terms, crescendo, rubato, and decrescendo, in conjunction with each other to create this sort of living, breathing entity, especially when you're playing ballad music. So hopefully this was enlightening for you. Let me know in the comments if there's any one of these terminologies that you've been using incorrectly all these years, or let me know if you hear any sort of weird context in how these terminologies have been used. I'd love to chat with you guys in the comment section, so let me hear your thoughts down there. And again, if you're new to the channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, so you can be notified each week we'll be posting new content, right? And then leave a comment in the comment section below so I can get to know you. All right, so until then, keep listening, keep singing, and keep practicing. And I will catch you next week for another tutorial. Bye for now.